Hey, welcome back to Presume Legal. This is Misha Janice. I'm an attorney licensed in New York and Florida, and I am watching the Karen Reed trial. That's a trial that's taking place in Massachusetts. It's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts bringing a case against Karen Reed for murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a crime where a death occurred. Today was day two. Today, the Commonwealth continued in their examination and presenting their case. And we started off, well, yesterday we left off with the Commonwealth's finishing their direct examination of Officer Stephen Seraph, a Canton police officer. So today we got to see the defense in their first cross examination of the case, examine Officer Stephen Seraph, and they came in hot and heavy. So let's get started. Defense counsel first confronted Officer Stephen Seraph, the witness, with questions about the dispatch log for the events that occurred on the morning of January 29th. So the dispatch log is a document that's created just to document the fact that there was an emergency call made and what units were sent out in response to that. Defense counsel confronted the witness with the dispatch log that had inaccurate or false information on it. And they really set the scene that from the very start of this entire incident, the information was not being reported properly and it was not being documented truthfully or accurately. So the dispatch log was wrong in three ways, and we saw that from this cross. The first way it was wrong, it showed that there were three officers that arrived at the scene at the same time: Officer Seraph, Officer Good, and Officer Mullaney. Well, we know from watching the dash cam footage that we saw in yesterday's testimony that Officer Seraph was the first and the only officer to respond initially to the scene where John O'Keefe lay in the snow. The log also stated that there was a different officer that arrived before Officer Seraph, and we know that that is, in fact, not what happened. The truth was that Seraph arrived first. There was no other officer there for a few minutes. And the third way that the log was incorrect was it listed the wrong address that they were to go to. It stated that the incident was at 32 Fairview instead of 34 Fairview Road. When asked about it, the witness stated it was just mistakes and there was no effort to mask or conceal the correct information for any reason. The next important thing that we got from Stephen Seraph's testimony was from his supplemental report that he wrote. He wrote a report after the fact stating that the only statement he heard the defendant, Karen Reed, say was, quote, "Is he dead?" Officer Seraph said in his supplemental report, laying out his observations from that morning, that he wrote that same morning, he wrote that the only statement the defendant made that he heard was, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" And the next day, when Officer Seraph spoke with Trooper Proctor, who was the state lead detective creating his own report, and he included in that report the same thing. Karen Reed only said, "Is he dead?" Well, defense counsel confronted him and said at the grand jury testimony on April 14th, months after the incident at issue, Officer Seraph apparently testified differently. He changed his story and for the first time said that Karen Reed said that morning, quote, "It was my fault. I can't believe this happened." So defense counsel confronted Officer Seraph about why it is that this is the first time anybody is hearing this. He didn't write those statements in his report, and he didn't tell uh, Trooper Proctor that Karen Reed made those statements either. Well, Officer Sarah said that it was simply an oversight. But I mean, we, considering us as, the virtual jury, basically, we are left questioning, is there anything else that is an oversight? Is there any additional information that's going to come out later? Maybe he remembers something else. Maybe he remembers something differently. So this is all just to attack the credibility of the witness. And, while I think that Officer Seraph did a good job, he really held his own and he came off as a credible witness. But yeah, there are definitely those questions that are left in my mind about, why were these important statements left off of not one, but two reports. Next, we had defense counsel play the dash cam footage from Officer Seraph's police car. And it became a little ridiculous because I don't know if anybody could decipher, could hear what was being said. But he played about 12 seconds maybe of the footage during which counsel proposed that certain words were being said. So this is footage of Officer Seraph getting out of his vehicle unit for the first time upon arrival. He gets out of the vehicle, he closes the door, the windows are up, so obviously the audio is gonna be very, very poor, and it was. I couldn't make out what anybody was saying. But apparently, defense counsel says that Seraph said, "What's going on?" or "What happened?" And then 9 seconds later, he told us, "Count 9 seconds in your head and listen for a woman's voice and, determine, is she saying, quote, 'My boyfriend, I left him and he didn't come home.'" It was very, very it was kind of frustrating, and it was a little bit like beating a dead horse because I don't know if the audio sounded better in the courtroom, but certainly, through these internet, World Wide Web waves in the sky, I couldn't determine what was being said. I could hear a woman's voice, but it wasn't you just weren't nobody was able to distinguish what was actually being said, and the witness was like, "Yeah, I don't hear it. I don't hear it." Defense counsel tried I think he played it 3 times and was about to play it another time, and the judge was like, "No, no more. Let's just move on." So that didn't work. The next thing was defense counsel played a side by side dash cam of Officer Seraph's dash cam as well as Officer Good's dash cam. He played them side by side, pointing out a person who was leaving the scene closest to where the police units were parked, right around where John was laying, leaving the scene, walking towards the house, walking past a car in the driveway and up, presumably towards the front door of the home. And defense counsel got witness to admit that anybody leaving the scene is improper and it's kind of shoddy police work to allow somebody to escape the scene when nobody really knows what's going on, nobody knows who has information, or if there's a witness. Defense counsel basically said it's not right to allow somebody to get away from the scene and possibly go talk and collude with other witnesses who may have been in the home. And the witness did admit that, yes, that was not appropriate. Finally, and I think the last important thing from Officer Sarah's testimony was him admitting that he never saw any pieces of tail light. He also didn't see John's missing shoe at the scene of the crime or the surrounding area. He said that he was making observations. He saw other officers, in the area looking around, just trying to take it all in, see if anything could be found, if there was anything obvious that was on the ground. He never saw any pieces of taillight on the ground in or around the yard or around John's where John lay. So his testimony wrapped up, and we moved on to the direct testimony for Officer Stephen Mullaney. Stephen Mullaney says that when he arrived at the scene, he heard the defendant repeatedly screaming, "Is he dead?" And "That's my boyfriend." And it was countless times that he heard her saying those things. We also hear that the defendant was making threatening statements, threatening statements about taking her own life. So she was brought to the hospital for treatment or observation or something because of those threats that were being made. On cross of Officer Mullaney, we get him establishing more of, what was going on, the heightened emotions that were um, that were evident at the scene. He said that, while he did not notice blood in Karen Reed's hair, she did appear distraught. She appeared hysterical, and she appeared to be in shock. She was screaming and yelling, and that in contrast, Jennifer McCabe was calm. She had no blood on her face or her hair, but Karen Reed did have blood on her face. The witness, Officer Mullaney, never heard Karen Reed say, "It's my fault," or never heard her say, "I hit him," never heard her say, "I did it." If he had heard her say that, that was something that he would have documented if he had. He did not. He also states that he doesn't recall seeing anybody put up a crime scene perimeter. He doesn't recall seeing crime scene tape. He saw other officers, specifically a Lieutenant Gallagher, use a leaf blower to clear some snow around the area where John was. There was also a Sergeant Link and another member of law enforcement. They were looking around for evidence, looking for clues about what happened, and looking for things that were out of place. He himself, Mullaney, was also looking for stuff, and he confirmed that he didn't see one piece of red clear plastic on the ground, much less 45 broken pieces of red clear plastic on the ground. He was not aware that uh, they were standing outside the family of one of the women who was outside. He didn't know that there was a first responder that resided in the house. He had no clue, basically, any of the connections that there were to the home. Finally, he testified that he never heard the defendant ask Jennifer McCabe to Google anything. Um, he didn't ever see Karen Reed and Jennifer McCabe in a car together, and he never heard Reed ask McCabe to Google anything. On redirect, the Commonwealth just made a simple point that while the witness didn't, he testified on cross that he didn't see anybody come out of the house at 34 Fairview. He also didn't see anybody come out of the house on any other neighboring property either. So I guess they're trying to say maybe it wasn't so unusual that nobody came out of the house at 34 Fairview because nobody else, none of the other neighbors came out of their houses either. Next, we got into the testimony of the firefighter paramedics. And the first one that testified was Timothy Nuttall. He is a firefighter EMT. He was scheduled to work a shift on the 29th to the 30th. It's a 24-hour shift, but he showed up early for his shift just before 6 o'clock because he wanted to beat the storm and to relieve coworkers who potentially needed to get home due to the storm. He says around 6 o'clock, their medical call came in for an unresponsive man in the snow. He headed out with several other EMTs to the scene. When he got to the scene, he noticed three women, but his primary focus was on the patient. And we know that's John. He said about the women that they did seem agitated and there was heightened emotion in the air. He heard some screaming, but he was unsure of who or where the screaming was coming from. When he got to John, he was lying on his back and he checked for signs of life, but there was no pulse at all. He started a ventilation bag. Now, when he started the ventilation bag, he testified a little bit later that just because ventilation bags, it's just the hand movements that he's doing. So he usually uses that time to look around a little bit and try and gather information about a patient. So in that time, he looked up and he asked in the direction of the women, "Does anybody know who this is?" And in response, somebody responded, quote, "I hit him." He identified the person as a mid-40s woman with blood on her face. So back to John, they determined that there was a cardiac event going on. They him in the ambulance, and once he was in the ambulance, they continued to do CPR. They took off John's jacket, big puffy winter jacket, and removed his clothes to see if there are any other injuries and to, assess the person from head to foot, basically. The witness stated that John had a hematoma, which is, a goose egg, on the right side of his face, above his eye, on his forward, and that he also had scratches on his upper right arm. He said the scratches were just below the shoulder and they were just above the elbow. Those scratches were not actively bleeding at the time, and that the blood, on the scratch looked like it was congealed already. He noted that John's nose and extremities and digits were very cold and white. There was a little bit of blood on his nose. Extremities were immobile due to the cold weather, he presumed. So, the main point made on cross examination of this witness was that the witness observed and was able to assess John's entire body. And while the witness did not notice the trauma to the back of John's head, he did note the hematoma over his eye and also a black eye. And he confirmed that the injuries that he saw on John were consistent with being in a physical altercation. So it could have been a physical altercation that he was in that caused him these injuries. It could have been something else, but it definitely could have come from being in a fight. Now, the defense questioned the witness about the statements that the witness overheard. They said that the witness also spoke with the state detective Proctor and spoke with him on February 8th. And at that point, the witness told Proctor that while rendering aid to John, the witness heard Karen Reed say to another woman, "I hit him," and that woman told Karen Reed to be quiet. So that's a different set of facts than what the witness testified to on direct examination. On direct examination, the witness said that he asked at the scene what happened and somebody responded, I hit him," speaking directly to him, the witness. But Proctor's report says that the witness told Proctor that the witness overheard the woman talking to another woman say, "I hit him." And the recipient said, "Be quiet." So we don't know which version is correct. We already know that there are some issues with Proctor. So the veracity of this witness's testimony, I guess, is still up for debate. Witness, when confronted, said he doesn't really remember exactly what he told Proctor, but he's telling us now that the person responded to his question and responded to him and said, "I hit him." Finally, the defense counsel made a point that the witness never told anyone at the hospital about what had allegedly been said to him, that somebody told him that she hit him. And normally that would be something that you would tell a treating medical provider to assist with treatment. But he never told anyone at the hospital. He never wrote a report about the event. He never otherwise documented what he heard the woman say. He also never contacted Canton PD or the Massachusetts State Police to tell them that this woman at the scene told me that she hit John. The first time he told anyone was talking directly to Proctor. So that was the end of that testimony. The last witness that we saw today, they just got into the beginning of his testimony, was Anthony Flametti. He's a Canton lieutenant with the Canton Fire Department. And really, they only got through his training history and education and work background, where he started the day on the 28th, going into the 29th. At that point, the judge called it a day. It was a half day today, and advised the jury that there is no session tomorrow. So there will not be court tomorrow, Wednesday, May 1st. So we'll see you back here on Thursday, May 2nd, which will also be a half day. So that's how it shakes up for today, the second day of the Karen Read trial. The witnesses were okay, I guess. I wasn't really swayed generally one way or the other. The defense got some points across, namely about errors in documenting information. They called into play the testimony of the first officer on the scene and what he heard the defendant say. They also established that at the scene of the crime, that at the moment, there were multiple officers there searching the scene, looking for evidence, looking for clues about what happened, and nobody saw any broken tail light at the scene at that time. I think that's going to be pretty important. And finally, that the injuries on John were consistent with injuries that one could get from being in a physical altercation. So that's it for today. I will see you after the next day of testimony. All right, until next drop. Peace.